Oh no, I forgot to put a thumbnail on there. I'm gonna have to put that on there. Yeah, it's the banner. Okay. There's like a whole genre of those on Instagram. I have like 10 saved already. I'm gonna use them every single time that I upload a new video. This is a good ass zesty off frame to pause on it.
Jujutsu Kaisen almost here, and the season focusing on the Culling Games arc. I wanted to make an in-universe what-if scenario for fun. Just because I think Shigaraki beats Mahito doesn't mean Mahito is a weak character in Jujutsu Kaisen, or that his moveset and skills are bad.
Yeah, I still think he loses. Like, not even close. Like, the moment that he awakens in Daika, he probably wins. And then, like, after that, once he gets all for one, he slams. It's just how it is. But people don't like that.
In fact, Mahito is in the perfect position to be a deadly opponent for the Culling Games. To recap, so we won't need to go over this for every opponent fights, let's go over his toolkit now. Mahito is a special grade cursed spirit, the disaster curse of humanity. His cursed energy physically allows him to fight Toto, someone who could fight Hanami, an older disaster curse, and Mekamaru, someone who could, temporarily, achieve special grade output. Though this is ambiguous and isn't specified to be curse or sorcerer. Mahito's special grade...
It's likely only temporary, but his release of cursed energy is on par with his special grades. His strategy against Mahito are decent too. So in the context of this, you would reference that he's only fighting Mahito, and you would assume that it means special grade curse. Which is actually kind of consistent with Mekamaru's pre-established rank, because he's a special grade 1, I think. I've not read pre-Shibuya in way too long. But essentially, the grading system is such that if you're a 4th grade sorcerer, you can always exercise a 4th grade curse, and so on. And when you get to 1st grade, you're fighting, and sorcerer, you're fighting special grade curses. That's why special grade sorcerers are such a big deal. It's why like the only 4 the current modern day special grade sorcerers are such a big deal. It's also why I think that the special grade statements really only mean curse unless they specifically refer to a sorcerer and say sorcerer. Because, like, Ryu and Uro are considered special grade as well, but they don't have, like, the in-universe rep that, like, Yuki and Yuta do, you know? Like, second only to Satoru Gojo, and, you know, Yuki's over here, like, pulling out a black hole on Kenjaku. And it's like Ryu's thing is that he shoots laser beams. There's a bit of a disparity.
Great output. Though this is ambiguous and isn't specified to be curse or sorcerer. Mahito's curse technique, Idol Transfiguration, allows him to use cursed energy to manipulate human beings' souls, which he can use with stockpiled humans to create defensive barriers and weaponry. Offensively, to manipulate the soul of his opponent, he seems to do permanent, unknowable damage if this lands. and on himself to regenerate physical damage and morph his body into unconventional shapes to avoid damage or even fly. Additionally, Mahito can use his curse technique to create additional fighters, either a doppelganger of himself that can't use his curse technique, or polymer human souls, made of multiple humans that have offense on the level of Shibuya, Todo, and Yuji, but almost no durability. He showed the...
I say that like it matters. Todo doesn't... Todo could not change in power at all, and his scaling would be entirely consistent, as weird as it sounds. The only there's like this weird argument that like all of JJK is actually weirdly relative, and that it's really just full power Gojo and Sukuna that like cliff everyone, and that because of the fact that Sukuna is like nerfed through the entire Shinjuku, that's why everything makes sense. But like everyone in the verse is like kind of relative, which like once you get to first grade, that's not actually too far off. Like Kusakabe was able to do something in Genjaku. And he's like considered the strongest grade 1, you know? And it's like Todo's still a grade 1, so it's like Todo has to be weaker than Kenjaku, or Kusakabe. So it's like, it's probably not actually that far off for everyone in the verse to be like kind of relative. And really the powers of separation are like if you have a domain or an answer to a domain. I was doing a tier list for fun, and I was like, maybe I should try ranking all the characters in Universe, but it's like, that really is the difference, is like everyone that can use domain or has a domain answer goes a tier above everyone else that is at first grade, and then there's like the people who've scaled to special grade sorcerers. And that's pretty much it. That's like the entire verse.
Ability to land black flashes, and these not only do extreme damage, but also restore his cursed energy and bring out his potential, allowing him to grow stronger if he lands these early in the fight while he's still fighting at full output. Physically, however, Mahito's distorted killing form might actually be at a higher physical level.
It's worded a bit weirdly there in the recording, but yeah, he's probably hitting harder here than he is with a normal black flash. My attacks don't reach him. He's become something completely different. The wording on the right's kind of odd, because it says he halts his metamorphosis, which either means that he could have evolved further, but he chose not to in order to become basically invincible, or it means his idol transfiguration, which that's how I interpret it, because he can't use it in the form. But I see it more that he chose to willingly sacrifice his ability to use idol transfiguration in the state because it was a response to Yuji, because of the fact that he can't use it on Yuji. That's how I personally see it, but it's one of those things where like the translation is off and the official translation for Jujutsu Kaisen is like really bad. So we just kind of have to like argue over which translation is accurate or more accurate based on the context of it. That's why I would go with the interpretation that he's choosing to halt his ability to use transfiguration instead of evolve.
He makes about the form being his ultimate evolution and so on. But considering it disables his ability to use idol transfiguration, I can only realistically see it being useful against enemies that can resist his curse technique, or if he uses it while inside his domain to overpower an enemy he clashes domains with.
I say this, but this doesn't end up being relevant. His distorted killing form is not relevant against any enemy in this video. I think Yuji is the only one. It's really sad. He came up with like this whole form, and then it like looks like shit. It doesn't do anything, and it takes away his strongest asset. Mahito's kind of a dumbass, isn't he? Which that's something that I'm going to get into later when we talk about Maki. Is Six's video on Mahito versus Toji? Is like Mahito really just kind of is a dipshit, which is really funny.
And that brings us to his domain, self-embodiment of perfection, which is simply a sure hit of idol transfiguration. But due to his encounter with Gojo, he was able to adapt his domain to last for 0.2 seconds, which allowed him to touch Todo before he could activate simple domain, while ignoring Sukuna inside of Yuji.
It's a very powerful asset not a lot of people have like an actual real answer or response to in Universe. The ability to just whip out a domain and activate it before someone can do anything is crazy. And we know, because the one time he used it, he was able to take out someone's hands is also pretty significant. A lot of the characters in this universe rely on their hands for like specific activation of like domain or abilities.
The only relevant players in Tokyo number 1 are Yuji, Higuruma, Megami, and Registar. Registar being defeated by Megami makes him mostly irrelevant, and Higuruma against Sukuna during Shinjuku Showdown. Higuruma likely does not scale to that version of himself, considering his potential is hyped up as on par with Satoru Gojo's, meaning whatever training he does in between arcs would likely have drastic improvement on his skills and output. This only leaves his domain, Judgment, which realistically could strip Mahito of his curse technique or domain, especially considering Mahito's crimes are focused more on bodily harm than destructive damage to the city. But
by the way, Higuruma does not do well against Sukuna. I should have probably emphasized that more than the fact that these characters don't downscale to their previous or their Shinjuku selves. He does not do well. He activates his domain, so it's like, sure, here's a sure hit, it's fine. But then when it fails and he doesn't take away his curse technique, he takes away Kamutake. Kusakabe is able to blitz Higuruma, and why don't I just pull this up? I'm sitting here talking. What is it? Higuruma, Kusakabe. Yeah, he's standing here, and he literally can't even... He gets, like, blitzed by Kusakabe, who has to come in and save him. And then, like, when you actually look at the fight, he just has, like, no basic fighting skills. And he just gets... He literally gets caught off guard, but it's pretty embarrassing for someone who gets hyped up as, like, capable of reaching Gojo. And, yeah, he doesn't actually do anything. The only thing he does is that he takes away Kamutake, and then he had, like, a one-shot ability, but he couldn't land it. And he was getting dogged on by, like, a nerfed no-power Sukuna. So he doesn't even do anything. That doesn't mean anything for Higuruma's scaling here.
But considering Mahito and Yuji are relative, and Yuji could take Higuruma down, Mahito would be even faster and stronger than the Yuji that had his curse energy taken away, meaning he would also cleanly get the dub. The next fighter would be Yuji. However, I think Mahito actually takes...
Yeah, so at the time, Sukuna didn't have access to his domain, because he was, like, so beaten. So they thought that because he couldn't use his domain at the time, that Judgment would take away his curse technique. But that means that even if he activates Judgment off rip, and like with Hikari, we learned that, like, if an ability isn't to a sure hit effect, right? If it's not, if the domain isn't aggressive, like in terms of harming the opponent, it's supposedly stronger. So he wins the domain clash with Mahito, right? He takes away Mahito's either domain or curse technique, but that would still leave his cursed energy. And then Yuji is just able to just outbox Higuruma, like with just his bare hands. So it's like if Mahito has his cursed energy and he's fighting Yuji, who's like a reinforcement guy, he's just gonna box Higuruma.
That's pretty cleanly. Consider that in Shibuya, Todo helped Yuji wear down Mahito's reserves of human souls.
And another point would be, if Mahito is put into Yuji's position against Higuruma, he could also land a Black Flash and get his curse technique back anyways. If his curse technique back with a Black Flash like he did against Todo, and if it takes away his technique, there's a chance that he might be able to do one or the other. But it's really one-sided.
Consider that in Shibuya, Todo helped Yuji wear down Mahito's reserves of human souls, was the target of Mahito's domain, which even Sukuna couldn't do anything about, and pump-faked Mahito right at the end, which ultimately gave Yuji the W. Meaning, if we're being honest, a rematch goes entirely in Mahito's favor. Yuji has no... And if Mahito is healthy, no real long-term answer to his distorted...
My computer chugging so hard.
killing form either. Some might try to argue If Mahito is healthy, no real long-term answer to his distorted killing form either. Some might try to argue that Yuji could downscale from his Shinjuku Showdown feats, but considering that he trained for that, he wouldn't scale to that state either. And even if you think he does, most of Yuji's impressive showings come from landing almost a dozen black flashes and awakening Shrine in his timescale. This is not Shinjuku Yuji versus Mahito, this is Culling Games Yuji.
I love that fucking panel.
This means the opponent who puts up the best fight is, unfortunately, Megami. Megami has the 10 shadows.
I love that I picked what might be one of Megami's best fights, and he just looks stressed as shit. He's so he's so tweaked out here. Look at this face. This is the face of a man who wants to go home.
A technique strong enough to help him survive against Toji, and when fighting characters more of his caliber, letting him have mobility, defense, and offense. How 10 shadows would interact with idle transfiguration is unknown, so I'll give the favor to Megami and assume they aren't valid targets. Meaning that.
Also, by the way, I love that in Modulo, which I will not read. One of Yuta's descendants inherits the 10 shadows and all of Yuta's stuff and is a Zenin. And they literally just summon Maharaga and they just dip into the shadow and hide. So it's like Megami really could have just like dipped. With the exception of Unknown Abyss, Fushikuro's extension cursed. Oh, this is the narrator. His 10 Shikigami cannot be summoned again when completely destroyed. However, the curse technique and power the Shikigami leaves behind when destroyed are inherited by the other Shikigami. So yeah, if they can be destroyed, it makes sense that they would be able to be affected. They probably have a soul, right? It's a bit questionable. Sukuna, I actually put the panel in later when talking about soul, like incarnated sorcerer's abilities to see the soul. And Sukuna makes the remark that when Maharaga was destroyed, he lost his ability to use the 10 shadows. So you could make more of a rationalist argument that the Shikigami are extensions of the 10 shadows itself. Like the shadow, Unknown Abyss, and by extension the user. So if that's the case, you can make a weird argument that like the Shikigami are an extension of Megami's soul. I don't really know how much I would go for that. I don't think Kashimo shooting lightning is an extension of his soul. But we do know that they can be destroyed. So he can still use things to destroy the Shikigami. He can still land black flashes on them and all that. But yeah. We can assume they would have souls, but let's be nice to Megami. Yeah. I tried to be charitable to whoever was in the losing side of a matchup in this video.
Transfiguration is unknown, so I'll give the favor to Megami and assume they aren't valid targets. Meaning that with Megami's long-range and close-to-range tools, as well as comparable fighting ability to Yuji shown by fighting side-by-side in Shibuya and being considered the strongest in a weakened Naobito, Mahito likely won't be able to outright land idle transfiguration. This is where things get interesting, as either Mahito's faster expansion gets Megami's hands and prevents 10 shadows summoning period, meaning Mahito wins, or they clash domains. If this happens,
And there's like no reason to assume he wouldn't go for a sorcerer's hands if he tries to use his quick domain. I mean, he went for Toto specifically because of Boogie Woogie, but every sorcerer uses their hands in some shape to create domains. Mahito is aware of this. He has an unconventional anatomy, so he can do it inside of his mouth by creating hands. But, yeah, he does it with his hands in Shibuya, so he knows that that's how it works. So
Megami is actually the favorite to win, considering he was able to retain a summoned Shikigami outside of his domain in the battle against Reggie. Meaning with how weak self-embodiment and perfection is to outside attacks, Megami could likely hold off the domain, shown by holding his own against Dagon's domain. Then, if he shatters the domain, Mahito would be trapped inside a domain that favors Megami physically with an endless number of Shikigami that he can't use his technique on, and a fighter who can move freely inside this space. However, Megami does not have a direct way to do permanent damage against Mahito, meaning that him only being vaguely stronger inside a domain he can't maintain for long, it's only until the domain collapses that Mahito will pick off Megami. And yes, if Megami summons Maharaga, they both die, but considering Maharaga was only tamed when Sukuna stole Megami's body, and used his own abilities better than he ever will, Raga just kills them both for all. The team of Yuji and Megami probably cannot take down Mahito in my opinion. as Megami is a worse teammate than Todo against a fighter like Mahito. And honestly, if he pulls out a quick domain and gets Megami's hands, it really is GG still. There would need to be a reason for him to try a direct domain clash against multiple fighters, which he would have already learned from with his interaction with Nanami and Yuji, instead of disabling Megami so he can call ISO on Yuji like he did in Shibuya with Todo. While it's not impossible for Mahito to waste his domain clashing with Megami, it's more of a leap in logic when we literally saw him use it to disable Todo before. So coming out of Tokyo number 1, I see him cleanly beating every fighter individually and even winning a jumping from Yuji and Megami. The only relevant Culling Games fighter in the Sakurajima quality was Maki, as Curse Nalia is just a worse Mahito. The one route to get him to be relevant is to be really edgy and use in-universe speed state.
I wanted to use what little animation was out there of like Yuji versus Yuta and Nalia versus Chozo for this video, because it would look nice, but they are crazy on Crackdown JJK. It's one of the reasons that I try to just use manga panels, because they really crack down on JJK in terms of the animation. They actually sniped one of my videos from like a year ago when they started doing promotion for season 3.
Statements to say he's Mach 3 and that's just too fast for Mahito, but honestly the speed scaling of JJK is really wonky, especially in the anime. In the manga, if we try and use that, then it's also stated that piercing blood is faster than sound, lowballed to Mach 1. And because Yuji could react to it, and Mahito ends up physically superior to Yuji, the speed difference wouldn't actually be that big. From there, Mahito's faster domain and better skill set should just give him the dub. The more interesting combatant is Maki, as she gained her full heavenly restriction, the soul-splitting katana, and awakened after her encounter with, that spiky guy. I like him, but I don't know his name. Sorry, Mr. Man. Anyways, Maki before her awakening doesn't show a good understanding of how to use her full set of abilities and is just blatantly weaker and slower. So we'll be discussing her after her power up in the Sumo domain. So we have to go over Maki versus Toji now. Maki...
My bad, gang. I forgot to put a transition in there.
Maki versus Toji now. Or do we? Hilariously,
it kind of works, but that should have been a fade-in.
Toji is a very contentious topic. It's actually irrelevant for this fight. Toji doesn't scale to Gojo as he used anti-hacks and speed to beat him. Then when he fought him head-to-head, he got Toji. So in terms of speed, this also doesn't matter as Maki feats are the same anyway, fighting Curse Nalia and 15-finger Maguna. Considering Sukuna with less fingers was compared to Toji, Maki is actually more impressive via direct feats. Adding on top of this that
No, chat. This one's real edgy. This one's real contentious. People really love to argue about this one. I am already perfectly aware of the fact that the like 3-finger Sukuna scaling to Shibuya Toji is more than likely... I think that the comparison exists for a reason, and so I still value it, but there's a statement to be made later on. I think it's by one of the people who fights Maki, that when your perception of someone, that when you're so much weaker than someone else, you can't properly perceive them, that powers blend together. And it's essentially this argument that like Shibuya Toji and like episode 3 Sukuna are like not actually comparable when they're just wildly different. If you're like really deep in the trenches, you can go for that. But like, I don't know, he must be the perfected form of Maki. You know, I kind of think it exists for a reason. But I'm well aware that you can argue against that if you just like don't want Maki to be Toji.
The Soul Split Katana seems to bypass conventional defenses. Maki's speed scaling is most important, and she's either faster than Mahito or relative. This gives her a way to do damage to Mahito's soul, and the speed to connect. So how does she handle Mahito's offense? Idle Transfiguration is something and works even on humans that are unaware of their own cursed energy, meaning it should work on Maki if it lands. However, considering that Maki has literally 0 cursed energy, and normal humans in JJK do have some cursed energy by default, I actually could see her being completely immune to this technique. To be charitable to Mahito, I'll assume he can use it on her. However, I definitely do not see self-embodiment perfection working. As we know from Nalia's domain, that domains use their sure hit effects by detecting cursed energy, and that Maki was essentially not seen as a valid target by the domain. If Mahito watches her fight with Nalia, he would likely be able to adapt his domain to affect her, but if this is a normal 1v1 without prep, he wouldn't know to do so in the first place, so he would waste his domain and be out of cursed energy. As we know, it takes him a little under 10 days to restore the energy to use domain expansion again. Distorted killing is wasteful here as Maki would bypass it, meaning the fight comes down more to whether Mahito can land idle transfiguration outside of a domain, since his ability to fly. Considering you have to be generous to assume Mahito's ability works on Maki in the first place, I would actually give it to her. But if he enters the colony in a free-for-all and watches the fight, Mahito's prodigious status could likely let him adapt his domain to her heavenly restriction.
Goddamn, Shibuya was so nice to this. I forgot how, like, underwhelming some of the Shibuya manga art is.
Extremely late into production, editor Neat here. So I just wanted to stress that with Maki being affected by the ability or not, it really should not work on here. As we know, Nanami was able to block idle transfiguration instinctively by reinforcing his soul with cursed energy, which that's not really a strength of cursed energy feat, it's more so that he knew the shape of his soul. Or he, as he says, he literally says he instinctively did it, so he didn't even consciously do it, which is something we never see anyone else do. That's why I'm not really considering it for this video, by the way.
It never happens ever again in the manga. That's like a one-time thing Nanami does once. I think it's just to, like, explain how his ability works, because, like, Nanami never does that against Mahito again either. Not in that fight, not in the schoolyard fight, not in Shibuya.
But that really does mean Mahito should not be able to use idle transfiguration on Maki if cursed energy can block idle transfiguration. That would necessarily mean that idle transfiguration requires the flow in normal humans who do have cursed energy kind of reinforces that along with Nanami. I try to do this better, but I know that I'll get comments if I don't put this in. Alright, bye.
Yeah. Now, like, let me pull this video up. If you like Mahito matchups, you would probably like this video. By 6. Watch this video. Now, a lot of the points he makes in there I don't really care for this video, and some of them I just don't really agree with. But one point he makes that's interesting is that inside of Jujutsu Kaisen, the soul and the body seem to have an interchangeable relationship based on the individual. So, like, Geto is able to be choked out by... Or Kenjaku is able to be choked by Geto while he's inhabiting his body, which implies that the soul and the body share a connection. And, like, Toji is able to overpower someone despite not having a soul, which means that a part of his soul is in his body. And he has, like, the heaver, like, Toji specifically, and that would obviously extend to Maki. And then there's, like, other cases. But, like, that's one route to get Mahito to not really be able to be able to affect Maki, is that, like, her soul being damaged wouldn't have as much of an impact on her body because her body is so strong, and specifically the way that it relates to her soul. That's one argument to go down, but I really just think that the cursed energy flow argument is, like, kind of all you need. Like, if he can't affect someone because they reinforce their soul with cursed energy, then it means cursed energy flow is a necessary part of it. And I don't think it's like a Sharingan thing where you can, like, inject cursed energy into the opponent to do it. It seems to be a link, because he never does idle transfiguration on something that isn't human that I can remember. He never seems to do it on anything that isn't a curse or a human, which both necessarily have cursed energy. So it just, honestly, if he touches Maki, it probably won't do anything. It probably just cuts his head off with, like, the Soul Split Katana, and that's it. But, like, it is contentious, so I could still see arguments against it, but I would go with Maki.
The relevant fighters in Tokyo number 2 are Hikari and Kashimo. Sorry, Panda. Although Hikari is hyped up early on next to Yuta and considered...
I'm just saying, man, he was right there with Kusakabe. He dodged Maximum Meteor, I'm just saying. And there's no way to prove that Mahito is stronger than Jogo, so... I'm just saying, maybe Panda boxes... And, you know, the thing is, Panda has 3 souls inside of him, so, like, maybe he's got some spiritual awareness. You know what I'm saying? You have to put the 3 souls in there and have them interact. I'm just saying, maybe Panda boxes up Mahito. You don't know.
One of the heavy hitters of Jujutsu High, as well as directly stated by Yuta to be stronger than himself when he gets riled up. Now, if I hated Hikari, I could downplay this statement in a lot of different ways, but Hikari doesn't have very many anti-feats in the series against this line of scaling. Hikari fights Yuji, Kashimo, and Urame. However, in his fight against Yuji, the moment he starts getting worked up, quote-unquote, Kashimo and Urame.
I can't believe they had my boy Yuji looking like this. I think the entire point is that he was dressed like that to infiltrate Hikari's little gambling ring, but he just looks like he looks like his dad. Oh, that's so creepy. He looks like his dad from that chapter where he was piping Kenjaku. He looks like, oh no, that's so gross. He looks like his dad from that chapter where Kenjaku was his mom. That makes me so much more uncomfortable in hindsight. Also, what is up with Hikari here? He never looks like this again. Top of his head looks like a cabbage. And like proportionately, his head is like a third of his torso. But then his like legs are like, why is he built like that? I feel like he's drawn completely differently when he fights Kashimo. This is a very goofy looking Hikari.
However, in his fight against Yuji, the moment he starts getting worked up, quote-unquote, Kirara's fine ass stops the fight. So base Yuji does not scale to full power Hikari here. Full abilities let him fight Sukuna. And we have no idea why he took so long against Urame.
He just keeps coming. XD, you bastard.
Considering it happened off screen. Maybe he just has a type. I don't know. It's kind of real for that. Everything is consistent to say that Hikari, inside his jackpot window, is special grade level and on par with Yuta. Considering he would be relative to Yuji in base and Yuta in jackpot, he's stronger than Mahito, but this doesn't give him an edge since Mahito can heal damage not done to his soul. On the flip side, however, whether Hikari can survive idle transfiguration is questionable. Uji knows from his RCT healing his brain from the chlorine attack that Hikari has either the best or second best RCT in the series. And in Sukuna's case specifically, he could even heal his own.
I forgot how bad Gege's art got in that little bit. Man, that happened during Perfect Preparation when Maki exterminates the Zenin clan, and Shinjuku when Maki fought Sukuna. He just has a... There's something about him having to draw Maki that makes his body like implode. He's having an aneurysm.
Soul with RCT. If we extrapolate that higher levels of RCT being able to heal poison in the brain are higher caliber, then Jackpot Hikari should be able to regenerate from idle transfiguration.
That's an interesting concept. Not a lot of manga could do that. It would be interesting to like use this kind of art style as like Sakuga for manga. But I kind of understand why they prefer to go with a consistent art style. I don't know. I've never seen a manga actually do that, come to think of it.
The brain are higher caliber, then Jackpot Hikari should be able to regenerate from idle transfiguration.
So this is a little questionable. I worded it this way as to say that it probably is, but it might not be. Sorry. But I worded it that way to see if him having faster regen implies that it's just on a higher level categorically. He should unconsciously heal his soul. Like, I believe that. It's just that it's hard to prove. But yeah, it surpasses even Sukuna-sama and Gojo Satoru. By the way, Gojo has some insane RCT if, like, the Sukuna Glazer puts Gojo on a higher pedestal.
Coupled with Hikari's domain being even faster than Mahito's at near instantaneous, and being more reinforced due to not harming the opponent, Hikari can likely win a domain clash with Mahito, as well as use it multiple times after. However, Hikari falls into the...
I think that's one of the parts that gets translated wildly different depending on who does it, but that's an insane direct translation if it's direct.
The trap of only being vaguely stronger than Mahito, meaning he would have to be absolutely exhaust Mahito of cursed energy to exercise him. Considering he ran out of jackpots in just his fight with Kashimo, but not against Urame, it's literally just a 50-50 coin toss if he can defeat Mahito or not. Pretty fitting for Hikari. In Kashimo's case, he definitely does not have an answer to idle transfiguration, and his attacks don't have the ability to put Mahito down for good. Considering Mahito is not Sukuna, Kashimo won't use Mythical Beast Amber and loses
Mythic Beast Amber. Mythical Beast sounds so much better. rendering any phenomena that can be created by electricity a weapon in his arsenal. And then all he does is, I think, punch Sukuna and, like, zap him. I think everyone who's pissed off about Kashima's fight sucking are right, and I really hope Mappa does some, like, wicked, epic, cool shit with Kashimo. Ugh, all the way in 2030. No, actually, probably like 2031 or 2032, because they'll turn Gojo versus Sukuna into a movie, won't they? I would see it.
Pretty blatantly. And considering Kashimo and Hikari entered the colony as enemies, I don't see them teaming up if Mahito intervenes in a free-for-all. So I think Mahito probably loses to Hikari, but it can definitely be argued that Hikari could run out of jackpots and get cooked. The Sendai colony has the most relevant characters in Yuta, Ryu, Uro, and Kuroroshi.
I had to crop this because it was her cheeks right above it.
Ended up playing out as a series of 1v1s. This was a true free-for-all, with a special grade curse and 3 special grade sorcerers throwing out everything they had to win. Kuroroshi is the special grade cockroach curse, and by far the weakest of the fighters involved in the free-for-all. However, due to its unique biology, it might be able to use Phagogenesis to create a duplicate of itself, similar to how it did before being killed by Yuta to avoid being one-shot by Idol Transfiguration.
Yeah, I don't like cockroaches. I know that some people are more neutral to them and see them more as a pest than as scary, but, like, I grew up, like, in the States, like the United States. And where I live, we have these things called palmetto roaches, which are roaches that are like the size of a finger. And the way that they work is that they live in trees outside, and then they try to migrate into homes when it turns winter. So, like, I have really bad associations of, like, the limbs of cockroaches. Specifically because they'll catch you off guard. They'll climb up walls and, like, jump. And, I had to see all those pictures of, like, the things off of its face, which convey the look of the cockroach. It gave me the, like, bad willies.
However, this was only shown to work once, and Mahito can realistically just kill him again, so I don't see this being something Mahito can't overcome. Also, while I didn't go over this for Nalia, common sense would dictate that if Mahito can use his curse technique on himself, a curse, he could also use it on other curses. Don't be that guy in the comments. Next is Uro, a reincarnated special grade sorcerer with the curse technique Thin Icebreaker, in the sky to move freely between them, to avoid direct attacks and close distance, as well as use long range attacks. She does have a domain, but unfortunately we don't know what it does since she clashed with Ryu and Yuta before breaking. She doesn't have a direct counter to Idol Transfiguration since she has no RCT, basic or advanced, and even if her domain is strong enough to negate Mahito's, we don't know what it does. At best, she can avoid being touched by flying, and that she cancels out domains. But then she isn't fighting or doing damage, and she's mentioned that Mahito can still press the attack and fly and chase her down. In a direct 1v1, we don't have the evidence to say she can win, despite her likely being stronger and faster. Ryu is a character who has grown on me since the first time I went through Sendai Colony, a very basic and straightforward character. He seemingly does not have a conventional technique and just seems to use mastered reinforcement to fire energy beams, noted to have the highest cursed energy output of any Culling Games player, which should include Jackpot Hikari and Lover Mode Yuta, and might even include 15-Finger Sukuna. I say this because we know Yuji was tried by Judgman, yet in Shinjuku, Higuruma retried Sukuna, implying it viewed Sukuna as an individual entity despite existing inside Yuji, meaning the highest curse energy statement could actually be referencing him as well, as all 3 of them do fight during this arc. On top of this, even after using and losing his domain in the class...
Kind of irrelevant. I just wanted to bring it in there as a flex for my boy Ryu. He probably has more cursed energy than, like, the 15-Finger Maguna we saw during the Culling Games.
He was able to fire, and that his...
Also, it is worth noting, Kenjaku is a player in the Culling Games. He might not be a player, but he's in the system. We see, like, when he dies, and against, like, Takaba and Yuta, that he adds a role. So, like, that statement could honestly apply to Kenjaku, too, which would make it applying to Maguna, like, more consistent. Ryu probably has the highest raw cursed energy output of, like, anyone in the series, but, like Heian era Sukuna. Gojo has a lot, but Gojo's is more so that it's, like, powerful and hacksy than just raw energy.
His outfit doesn't diminish the way other sorcerers do following domain expansion. We even saw in terms of raw cursed energy that he could reduce a triple cleave from Sukuna to one cut, albeit it wasn't enough to save him. Rest in peace.
After he lost to Yuta, his hair was undone. Which means that after that fight with Yuta, he spent his time redoing his pompadour, and then he still just got his fade ran by Sukuna.
Now, Mahi is definitely capable of severely harming Mahito. It wouldn't be at the spiritual level, and since we don't know what his domain does, we can only say it should definitely counter Mahito's, due to the cursed energy disparity. Following this, Ryu should be able to tear apart Mahito with blasts from range, use whatever his domain is, and generally outlast Mahito. All Mahito needs is one touch, but when dealing with someone with so much cursed energy who doesn't need to engage in close quarters, I don't see Mahito overcoming him. If he tries to scrap with Mahito, he can definitely be caught off guard. So I'm just gonna say this is most likely Mahito's win, but I understand if you think Ryu is just too chatty. So while working on the video, I thought back to it and I realized that Ryu and Uro are incarnated sorcerers, which should give them the ability to be aware of their outline of their soul. But I disagree, because we know that Hana and Angel, Yuji in some special cases, Yuji and Sukuna can actually coexist. Sukuna can pop out and talk, and then we know Hana and Angel work the same way, and even Megami can impede Sukuna and disrupt Sukuna with the 10 shadows.
Let me maximize this so I can read it easier. My 10 shadows technique stopped functioning after Maharaga was destroyed. This has to be Fushiguro Megami's. His soul was submerged in the bath, and yet the brat's dismantles breathed new life into it. Yeah. So.
Those are weakening his cursed energy output. So I don't really think that just every sorcerer that is incarnated is just by default aware of the outline of their soul, and I think you kind of need more evidence that they are. So no, I don't think Uro and Ryu just are spiritually aware by default. This simply leaves Yuta Okotsu, the golden child of Jujutsu, who was second only to Satoru Gojo at this point in the series. While there are a lot of glazed...
Did I not put in a music transition there?
This simply leaves who was second only to Satoru Gojo at this point in the series. While there are a lot of glazed statements for Yuta, there's only really two things that are relevant here. Those being that Yuta's curse technique allows him to copy his opponent's own curse technique if he can consume a part of them, and that Yuta has immense amounts of cursed energy on his own merits and especially when paired with Rika. Combining these factors should allow him to use idle transfiguration, and with more cursed energy than Mahito, he's going to be able to counter the self-embodiment of perfection with mutually assured love, giving him a clean dub. Yuta is a perfect counter to Mahito, and in a 1v1 absolutely mops him up. However, the more interesting scenario is if Mahito invades the free-for-all. As we saw, it was decently close with Ryu and Yuta at the end, so if Mahito watches the fight go on instead of jumping in, he can easily camp Yuta. Ironic, I know. But even if he jumps into the three-way clash and starts getting active with everyone, the damage he inflicts and cursed energy he would make the others expend could be enough to alter the outcome, possibly getting Ryu or Yuta killed before dying. However, I do still think Yuta would win in the deadlock in this scenario. As we saw, Yuta's characterization is that he's a softie, and he was so patient with Ryu and clashed on his own terms, out of respect, due to having the power advantage to risk that clash. If Mahito is there and he has to view the scenario in terms of survival, he will just lock in and be more willing to kill rather than try to get the points. Meaning, in summary, I do think Yuta takes Mahito 1v1 and in a free-for-all. Overall, I only see Mahito hard losing to Yuta, with everyone else being somewhat questionable if we're charitable to Mahito. If you disagree, tell me why in the comments below. If you have your own video on the topic, tell me so I can react to it on stream. Bye-bye!
So yeah, I'm not shocking anyone. Yuta just mops him up. There's no way to argue he beats Yuta. I wouldn't mind slandering Yuta. I like the anti-Yuta campaign that's been going on recently, but yeah, he just wins. But that's my video. There's not much that I didn't put in that I didn't think was relevant. 6's take is really bizarre. I don't really think that that's general power scaling. But yeah, this was fun. I'm happy with the end.